to request uh, Professor Krishna Ravi Srinivas to please come and speak a few lines.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I congratulate the DST-CPR Center for organizing this one-day symposium, which is very important. I also thank Professor Raghav and Professor Hari Babu for inviting me and giving this opportunity. I will build upon what the earlier speakers have said. I am not going to make any PowerPoint presentation, just going to talk. The subtitle says Innovating Futures. Towards innovating futures itself is a very interesting theme. So futures is plural, future is singular. So when we think in terms of futures, we all know that science, technology, innovation has got a huge critical role to play. Going back, we also know how whenever Bush thought of very differently about science, technology, and society, and also how his classical work impressed not only the scientists and also the policymakers. So science as an endless frontier was the theme of those days. But today we don't talk of the science as an endless frontier. Today we think more in terms of STI as a driving engine or an accelerator, or more to speak that the one that drives the economy, society together. But when it comes to the scientific innovation system, ecosystem in India, or the STI ecosystem in India, I'm going to talk about only 5 points which I think attention need to be paid. If you go back, prior to the 1947, we had a huge debate on the role of science technology. At that time, innovation was not at all a term that was used in vogue. So, or rather, the role of science itself was highly debated. We had two different camps, both, were together on one point that the India post-British colonization should be a free India with its own independent, with its own authority to do what it wants. And more importantly, the people should be freed of debt, hunger, health, and all the ills that were afflicting at that time. So the visions were very different. And the post-47 developments took in a very different way, which we all know. But the question here is that when we talk of the futures now, or more we talk of innovating futures, what futures we have in mind? Definitely, the idea is not to go back to that time, but more to think in terms of alternative futures. Now, alternative futures today could mean different things in the sense that today alternative futures need not be confined in terms of what we envisage for now. We need to think what the future generations might need or what they would need also to take into account what the changing circumstances, which I'll come later. So the whole idea of innovating futures and then the role of STI ecosystem and the institution itself is a very interesting topic. And I'm quite sure that, people will write more on that. Basically, our fundamental problem today seems to be this. We have a lot of quantum mission, we have a lot of missions, and then we all have a whole lot of institutions working on different purposes. Like institutions like BIRAC on one hand, then we have the ISRO, we have so many space missions and all. But they are all good. They are all doing excellent work. But where is the unified vision of the role of science, technology, innovation in India? We talk of Viksit Bharat, we talk of India as a developed country by 2047. But do we have a roadmap? Do we have a vision document? Or do we have something that says that, fine, we are now in 2024. By 2040, before that, by 2027, by 2035, we would do this in this particular field. We will target this, we will achieve this goal, which could be linked up with anything, not necessarily with SDGs, but our own internal self-driven goals. So the problem here is that we need to have a unified vision of role of STI in this country, which means we need to have not just a role, but roadmaps, technological forecasting, technology assessments on one hand, foresight exercise to build a very comprehensive approach so that we know if you talk of Atmanirbhar, we will have Atmanirbhar in this sector by this time, or we would have attained self-sufficiency in meeting some of our critical inputs which on which we depend for the external sources now. So that is crucially lacking. Unfortunately, the state policy of 13 laid a way for us to think ahead, but we have not been able to follow that with a strategy. Now contrast that with China. Way back in 2010, I'm talking of 2010, they came up with a whole lot of series of documents, about 15, 20 documents, which talked about the roadmap talking about 2050 as to where they want to go, what they want to achieve. The good thing about Chinese is that they have long-term vision, they have roadmaps, but they're also very sensitive to the changes. So they keep on changing their plans, and then they have long-term commitments. For example, biotechnology and all, their long-term commitments, their long-term programs go beyond 5 years, in the sense that they think in terms of 10-year, 15-year long-term program in a specific field, and then objective is there. So based upon the objective, the allocation, the roles of the private public sector, everything is decided. Here, one major advantage which the Chinese have, although they are very centralized, their planning is very centralized, is that there's a very good understanding between the public sector and private sector and the whole ecosystem, that who will do what, how much support the government will give. Otherwise, without that, they would not have had Tencent, they would not have had Huawei, they would not have had so many breakthroughs in different high-tech uh, uh, sectors. So I'm not saying that we should duplicate that. All I'm saying is that we need a vision. We also need to be backed up with financial resources and then sufficient human resources to be developed on that. Coming back and forth, if you look at it, we have quantum mission. We have that quantum mission has got some lot of thirst is being given to development of human resources and other things. Parallelly, we also have PLI linked schemes, the productivity linked incentive schemes for different industries. There, as Professor Krishna said, the idea is that we will link the manufacturing with productivity and then give incentives, and then the R&D component or the innovation component will come later. This is one way of addressing the problem, because right now we need green hydrogen. Right now we need a lot of productivity linked initiatives to be set up so that the immediate demand could be met. It could be electric vehicles, it could be solar batteries, it could be any sector. The other way which the US has also been addressing this is through some acts like the Chips and Science Act. If you look at this Chips and Science Act, it's a very comprehensive act. In fact, it is so comprehensive, I would say that it tries to address which normally science policies do not try to address at all. For example, Chips and Science Act gives a specific incentives to the industry. That is very clear-cutly mentioned, that industries which are willing to invest in USA on these specific sectors, even if they're going to be foreign investment, they will be given a lot of incentives. Parallelly, the money goes to NSF also to invest and then to spend R&D on a couple of things, and also to the various institutions of the US government. And these two are more complementary in the sense that industry gets incentives, NSF and other institutions get the R&D allocation to different sectors. So they complement and supplement, in which sense that industry can rely on NSF, NSF can give more money to industry on specific heads for specific programs. But the third component, which I think is very important and very crucial, particularly for a country like us, is that the Chip and Science Act addresses gender disparity. It has got very specific provisions. And more importantly, the Act also looks where the innovation has grown, where the innovation has lagged behind. For example, they say in the last 15 years or so, some sectors, some regions in USA have grown exponentially when it comes to innovation, whereas there are many sectors or many areas which lag behind. Unfortunately, they have been lagging behind. Even in 15 years, they couldn't make any breakthrough in terms of employment or high-tech industries. So the Chip Science Act tries to reverse this by giving specific incentives to those regions by incentivizing the industry to set up their plants there. And more importantly, that covers historically Black colleges and universities which have been lagging behind. So it is not just the NSF which gets money, it's also the historically Black-oriented universities and colleges which get money. So they try to address three levels of disparity: the gender disparity on one hand, the disparity among the regions. For example, among the regions, if you look at it, the startups, they are all concentrated in about 5 or 6 major cities, right from Boston to California side. But what the country, USA, they thought they need startups across the country. So it should be in Midwest. It should be in places where there are no startups. So those sort of incubators, ecosystems are also being cultivated. So this is a good approach I think we need to think about. I'm not saying that it can be easily duplicated or it can be easily done. But then there's the idea that to link up industry, R&D based funding, which goes to institutions like NSF, and then to identify the marginalized or the regions left behind, takes a very different approach towards science, technology, innovation, which has got lot of implications for us to understand and learn. My third point here is that this is an era of emerging technologies, whether you call blockchain, AI, anything, emerging technologies are here to stay. And the number of emerging technologies is also going to increase in the sense that as the technological revolution is gathering momentum, more and more emerging technologies would come. For example, today we are in the era of cusp of AI revolution, which we all know. At the same time, we also spend a whole lot of infrastructure building in financial allocation goes to these all these emerging technologies in India. But are we able to link up governance of these emerging technologies vis-a-vis incentivization through various schemes? I think here we lack. And this is a major problem because take the question of crop genome editing. Crop genome editing has got a huge potential, but due to our fundamental problems in the governance of genetically modified or plants, still we are not been able to come up with a very comprehensive policy, and then the genetically modified plants itself is subject to now Supreme Court decision in the cases and all. On the other hand, a forward-looking policy on governance of emerging technologies we need, which will look into not just the governance potential, the innovation potential, and try to match both of them. Because emerging technologies like cryptocurrencies, blockchain, and then AI, all of them have huge potential, but huge governance problems as well. AI has got huge governance problem. It also is a problem of trust, bias, discrimination, and all. Now, one way the Indian government and most governments think is that innovate first, regulate next. On the other hand, if you're going to do regulate first, innovate next, then that'll create problem. Of course, we all know about the pacing problem. We all know about the Collins dilemma. We also know about the whole lot of other issues when it comes to governance of emerging technologies, what models to use. But a comprehensive approach towards these emerging technologies will try to balance governance as well as innovation and try to ensure that governance is sync with innovation. It promotes innovation while innovation does not go overboard or innovation does not become something that becomes unmanageable. Taking the case of AI, one can definitely say that today it has become a huge problem to control technologies like deepfakes. But it's also needed that we need to think in terms of anticipatory governance for them so that we bring in all stakeholders to understand how these technologies emerge, how they could be harnessed for the society, as well as how we can collectively govern them. So unless we are able to really address the governance and innovation simultaneously, the emerging technologies are likely to pose more problems to us, even as they become more useful to us. I think the next point which I would like to say is that the elephant in the room, which normally the science, technology, innovation community or normally the people who talk of science policy do not understand or do not talk about is the Anthropocene. Anthropocene is going to be with us. It is there and it is inevitable. But do we have science policies? Do we have science strategies which takes into account the Anthropocene? When I talk of Anthropocene, I'm not talking about just of climate change. You look around, you know that we are in a serious crisis when it comes to ecosystem tipping points. Now, these ecosystem tipping points of the 9 ecosystems which bind our world, 6 have been already breached or on the verge of being breached up. So, if we think in terms of traditional science policy, which doesn't take into account the Anthropocene or doesn't take into account the human-induced changes in the environment, ecosystem, as well as developments like global warming, it is becoming very difficult as to what we think of imagined futures or what futures. So an Anthropocene conscious or sensitive science policy will look at various things which the traditional science policy will not look into. For example, the traditional health policy will look at the cause of disease, pattern, and everything, but it will not give that much importance to environmental factors other than the traditional approach will do. But the changes in the temperature is going to have massive impact on human health, particularly our vulnerability towards heat and then summer, and then our vulnerability to bear the extreme heat and other factors. Now, a traditional health policy will not identify these as the major issue. But the moment you reach the 1.5 degrees centigrade, the moment you reach that level, there could be a whole lot of other health issues which need to be addressed to, which means that you need to do some anticipatory thinking on that and identify how best we can do. For example, can we modify our buildings in such a way that we are able to cope up with that? Can we see that the human suffering or the human vulnerability on account of the 1.5-degree breach is able, we are able to understand and that try to come to grips with that through our interventions. So if we factor Anthropocene in our science policy thinking, it does not mean that we should think in terms of limits to growth. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that understand that if your science is going to help more in the tipping points, ensure that we are able to think in terms of how not to breach the tipping points. Can we think in terms of different science that can address the Anthropocene and then the tipping points and the broader questions before humankind in a different way? For example, what type of science policy we need to address the future needs, particularly when we know that in future we are going to have serious crises in across all ecosystems. What sort of future we will leave behind? You talk of global commons like atmosphere, ocean, everything. What sort of science policy we need to tackle the changes and the challenges in the future? So this we factor, we may think that our current concern and constraints are necessary but not sufficient. The last point I would discuss about is that today we all think in terms of traditional science policy approach, which is built upon the earlier models like scientists collaborate, we build institutions, we build ecosystem around the institutions. But digitization and AI is going to change things very drastically. It is also changing. On one hand, the scientific volume in terms of literature is enormous, it is exploding. On the other hand, our capacity to handle that is not all that great because, see, the problem is knowledge explosion also creates the problem of handling knowledge. One way which countries have been trying to address is that to create integrated systems, integrated databases, and then how to use digitization for science. There's a very good report from OECD on digitization of science, which talks about how these things could be tackled, how it could be done. But foreseeing this, what the Chinese have done is that they call what they call as e-science. This e-science idea tries to ensure that all the science that is done within China or all the science, what all the scientific institutions are done are captured and then valorized. Valorization comes when you use the data and knowledge by ensuring that you find more value addition by combining them, by doing data analytics, and also see where the potential lies. For example, we all know that the Google's Alpha, it came up with proteins which scientists could not have even thought about. And that is a huge impact. On the other hand, when AI is going to do a lot of this type of work, what exactly the scientists can do? If tomorrow an AI model comes up and says that this is going to totally change the drug discovery model, it's already happening. And all the major firms which are in the top 15, 20 in the pharma field are investing huge amount of in AI drug discovery. And this is going to be a major challenge because even a traditional generic model approach won't work here because the paradigm is totally shifted in the sense that you need not go through the traditional model of chemical synthesis, reverse engineering, because AI will give you more and more options. So if that happens, it's going to happen in all the fields of science, chemistry, biology, everywhere. Biology, it's all the more important because you have this bioinformatics clubbed with AI. So this challenge, I'm not sure whether how far our science policies, our scientific ecosystem is really able to understand and cope up with. On the other hand, the real problem here would be how do we govern AI? How do we use AI when it comes to science? Because right now we all know that there are a whole lot of problems with LLMs, a whole lot of problems with AI-based decision support systems, and there are hallucinations. There could be false positives, false leads, and then misleading claims. So if you talk of data digitization and then AI and then big data analytics, for all that, we need to train our scientists and institutions to cope with them. Otherwise, what would happen is that we won't be able to valorize and then do a lot of work with which we are already doing now. We will be lagging behind in making the best use of them on one hand. On the other hand, we will lag behind in applying AI very creatively. If foreign companies, if others are able to do that, And then if our pharma manufacturers whole sort of competitive advantage comes only in reverse engineering, if AI makes that totally as something that is not at all required, what will we do? Now, if you really extrapolate this knowledge management and then knowledge management through AI is going to be a major challenge because AI is going to give you what you have never thought of. So many options in terms of molecules, in terms of proteins, in terms of everything else. So how do we work with such a massive systems which we have built? Are scientists going to be co-creators, or are they going to be co-pilots, or are they ones who are going to work better with the AI systems and then ensure that they understand it better, and then they also work together to ensure that the objectives of the science are fulfilled? I think these 5 challenges we need to understand and address. One way to look at all these things, or one way to understand all of them, is that if we really want to invent futures, we need to have an idea of what future we want, what future we think of, and what future we strive for. But unless we plan and think of those things, we won't get the future we deserve. So if we want to talk of the innovating futures, we should first identify the future we deserve and then the future we desire. Only when we know that the future we desire can be reached, when we work for it, we will deserve the future which we aspire for. I'll stop with that. Thank you.